During the rehearsals for the May Day Air Show in 1954, the Soviet government unveiled the Badger, Russia's answer to our own B-47. This swept-wing twin-jet medium bomber was needed to replace their obsolete propeller-driven World War II bomber version of our B-29. Recognition of the Badger should not be difficult, for it is quite a distinctive aircraft. However, since it so closely resembles its counterpart, the Bison, the Badger's most distinguishing feature should be noted and remembered. Without a thorough knowledge of the features which distinguish the Badger from the Bison, the ground observer would have difficulty in identifying it at high altitudes. Observe the Badger now in this high-altitude view and try to recognize and remember some of its more pronounced features. The wings and tail of the Badger are square-tipped and sharply swept back. Also noticeable are the two elliptical undercarriage pods situated out from the fuselage and along the trailing edge of the wings. These pods protrude behind the trailing edges. In this view, there are two characteristics which will definitely establish this aircraft as the Badger. The wings are set about halfway back along the fuselage and have a marked cranked bend in the leading edges. This is an unusual feature in bomber aircraft. Also, the Badger has two engine nacelles which form a prominent rectangle encasing the wing fuselage function. This rectangle protrudes ahead of and behind the wings. These have been recognition features which the ground observer would be most interested in. Now let's take a closer look at the Badger in a side view, a position in which the pilot or air observer would be most likely to see it. Here you can recognize some very familiar features. The nose section is long and pointed. The cockpit, well forward of the wings, appears to have a conventional Douglas design, very similar to our DC-6. A radome can be detected directly beneath the cockpit. The large angular tail is similar to the fin on the Beagle. The horizontal tail is mounted on the vertical tail above the gunner's greenhouse. Note the prominent tail turret, similar to our B-29. If you are not in a position to recognize the Badger in the views already pictured, then the head-on view will be your last resort. Notice the drooped wings with the two engine air intakes adjacent to the fuselage. They combine with the underslung undercarriage pods to give this aircraft an individual appearance. The high fin and rudder, with the positive dihedral of the tailplane set above the upper surface of the fuselage, makes the identification of the Badger comparatively simple. The fuselage of the Badger carries three gun turrets, one on top just behind the cockpit, one directly beneath the point where the vertical tail's leading edge joins the fuselage, and the third turret located in the aft end of the fuselage. These three turrets give the Badger heavy defensive capabilities. Now observe the Badger in various maneuvers and see if you can distinguish some of its important recognition features. Note particularly the marked crank in the leading edges of the swept-back wings. Observe the two engine nacelles situated close to the fuselage, the undercarriage pods, the swept-back tail and rudder, and the conventional cockpit with the long and pointed nose section. Remember these features, and you should have no trouble in recognizing Russia's new swept-wing twin-jet medium bomber, the Badger, the Soviet Union's answer to our B-47. The May Day Air Show, staged by the Soviet government in 1956, introduced to the Western world the Beagle, Russia's answer to the British Canberra and the later American version B-57 aircraft. Since then, the Beagle has become the Red's first-line twin-jet light bomber and is now the backbone of the Chinese Communist, North Korean, and Soviet air forces. Therefore, it is necessary that all crew members and observers be able to recognize the Beagle at a glance. Recognition of this aircraft should not present any great problem, as there are few like it in the world today. Even from this distant view, a ground observer could easily recognize the Beagle's many unique straight lines and angular features. Notice the very long nose, the angular square-tipped wings with their straight leading edges, and the square underslung engine nacelles protruding fore and aft of the wings. As we draw closer to the Beagle, these features are accentuated. The fuselage is not overly long. The wings have been set back to give that effect. Noticeable also are the straight leading edges and tapered trailing edges of the wings. Easily recognizable are the square tail tips with their sharply swept back and tapered leading and trailing edges. An aircrew member would be more apt to see the Beagle in this position. Again, you can recognize the slender fuselage with the wings set about halfway back, thus giving the Beagle its long-nosed appearance. Notice the underslung engine nacelles protruding well ahead of and behind the wings. Here in a closer look, we can distinguish some newer recognition features of the Beagle. Observe the sharp angular tail rising out of the fuselage. To the rear of the rudder can be seen the tail gunner's greenhouse and familiar B-29 type turret at the end of the fuselage. The bubble canopy is set about halfway along the nose, and a radome can be seen situated almost directly beneath the cockpit. You might have trouble in recognizing the Beagle in this head-on view, for it has been justifiably mistaken for our own B-26. Remember that the wings are set in the shoulder position and have only a slight dihedral. The fuselage appears circular with the canopy on top. The underslung engine nacelles are readily noticeable. The fin and rudder stand high above the wing and fuselage line. You can see that the tail has much more dihedral than the wings. Keeping all of these recognition features in mind, watch now as the Beagle makes several passes. Remember also that the defensive armament of the Beagle is typical of Soviet aircraft. You'll find nose guns and a tail turret, both of which probably house some type of 25mm gun. Notice especially the straight, angular, square characteristics of this bomber. The very long, slender nose, square-tipped wings with a swept-back tail, and finally the square engine nacelles protruding fore and aft of the wings. If you keep the Beagle's prominent recognition features in mind, you'll have no trouble in identifying this deadly weapon. It's Russia's first-line twin-jet bomber and the Soviet counterpart to our B-57. The aircraft you see on the screen now is the new swept-back wing Beagle. Information on this aircraft is not yet available. However, a recognition film will be forthcoming in the near future.